If you were to walk outside tonight, look up at a perfectly clear sky and just wonder if there's a grand architect behind it all, you'd be in pretty good company.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, humans have been doing that forever.
Right. But usually, when people look for evidence of a divine creator, they look out into the distance. They point a telescope at the fine-tuning of the cosmos. Or, I don't know, maybe they look through a microscope at the structural perfection of a cell.
Yeah, it's always the classic argument from design. We inherently want to look for the fingerprint of a creator in the cold, hard mechanics of the universe.
Exactly. It's always something abstract.
Well, it feels safer that way, right? Kind of keeps the divine at arm's length.
It really does. But what if the most undeniable proof of a higher power wasn't found in a telescope? Or hidden deep in the pages of some dusty, ancient, holy book?
Right.
What if it was found in the most visceral, intimate, physically overwhelming experience a human being can possibly have?
That is the million-dollar question today.
It is. Welcome to today's deep dive. If you've ever felt a disconnect between your physical life and your spiritual beliefs, this one is really going to challenge how you view that divide.
For sure, because today we're opening up a highly unusual text.
Yeah, it's by a writer named Zhu Feng, and it's gracefully translated by Konglong and Alien. The title is quite a mouthful. There is a supernatural soul in the universe, 40 evidence, proving the existence of the greatest creator.
It's an ambitious text. It attempts to literally prove the existence of a grand designer using 40 distinct pieces of evidence.
And we are zooming in on a very specific, heavily debated part of that text today. We aren't looking at the cosmological stuff, we're looking at evidence number 21.
Right, which blends theology, evolutionary biology, and just raw philosophy in ways you simply do not typically see.
Because the author makes an incredibly bold claim here. They argue that human sexuality, specifically the intense pleasure of a sexual orgasm, is not just some evolutionary mechanism to carry on the family line.
No, they claim it is literal, experiential, undeniable proof of a divine creator.
It's wild to even think about.
It is. But to truly grasp the architecture of this argument, we really need to set the foundational context of the text first.
Good idea. Where do we start?
Well, before we even get into the biology or the physical details, the author begins with a philosophical premise. They suggest that if we just stop for a moment, open the windows, and genuinely calm our minds.
Just really tune in.
Exactly. If we do that, we can sense a supernatural power. We can actually feel that there's a force controlling the movement of the universe, the birth and death of all things, and even the track of human life.
And the author poses this rapid-fire series of questions to you, the reader, that really sets the stage.
Yeah, they don't hold back.
No, they ask, if there isn't a super wisdom out there, how did the universe come into being in the first place?
Right.
And if there is one, does it actually care for us? And crucially, how can we actually get to know it?
And that last question is the hinge of the entire argument. The text suggests we don't have to look out into the astronomical void to know this creator.
Right, no booming voice from the clouds required.
Exactly. We can know it through the design of the human body itself.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why the text points to human sexuality as evidence of a creator, we actually have to take a hard look at evolutionary biology first.
Right. We have to look at why human sexual reproduction shouldn't actually make sense from a purely scientific, economical standpoint.
Yeah, the author cites research from R. Stephen Howard, who's a researcher at Indiana State University, and he digs into the mechanics of asexual reproduction.
And when you look at asexual reproduction, where an organism basically just clones itself, the biological advantages are staggering.
Oh, I mean, it requires significantly less energy, right?
Way less. You don't have to spend resources developing secondary sex characteristics just to attract a mate. You don't have to risk exposure to predators while you're courting.
Which is a huge risk in the wild.
Exactly. Plus, you don't have the biological cost of meiosis, where only half of your genes are passed on. Asexual reproduction is just incredibly efficient.
So think of asexual reproduction like a flawless, high-end office copy machine. It just sits there, plugged into the wall, and spits out exact perfect replicas efficiently.
Just one after another.
Yeah, with zero drama and zero wasted energy. Human sexual reproduction, by contrast, is a messy, complicated, high-energy collaboration.
It really is a logistical nightmare if you think about it.
Seriously, two separate beings have to find each other, court each other, align their genetics, and risk a whole host of complications just to produce a single offspring.
What's fascinating here is how the author takes that glaring biological inefficiency and pivots it into a theological argument.
How so?
Well, they ask a very logical question. If human intelligence is capable of building a master machine that continuously produces products without friction,
Like the copy machine.
right, why couldn't the greatest creator simply make a biological matrix to continuously produce offspring without the need for two separate sexes?
Why design this wildly complex dance?
Exactly. The text uses a quote from Jared Diamond, a renowned physiology professor at UCLA, who just bluntly states, human sex is weird.
I mean, he's not wrong.
He goes on to say, it is magical, incredible, and beyond nature.
Beyond nature. Man, that phrase does a lot of heavy lifting here.
It really does. Now, the text does acknowledge the counterargument. From a biological standpoint, crossbreeding does have distinct benefits.
Right. Mixing genes helps remit or eliminate genetic diseases. It creates diversity that prevents a species from being wiped out by a single virus.
Exactly. But the author makes a very sharp distinction here that we have to focus on. They argue that while the biological mixing of genes might be necessary for survival, the intense reality-altering pleasure of the act is completely unnecessary for the sheer mechanics of bearing children.
Right. The physical plumbing could just work without the fireworks.
Exactly. And the author uses a very stark, undeniable example to prove this point. They point to the reality of prostitution.
Oh.
Prostitutes and their clients are engaging in that intimate act, but they are absolutely not doing it to procreate. They are seeking pleasure or selling pleasure.
Right. Procreation is the last thing on their minds.
Exactly. Therefore, if the pleasure isn't strictly necessary for the mechanical act of reproduction, the pleasure itself must serve an entirely different purpose.
Let me throw an analogy at you to see if I'm tracking the author's logic here.
Go for it.
It's almost like a manufacturer building a multi-million-dollar luxury sports car, engineering this massive V12 engine just so you can use the exhaust heat to toast a marshmallow?
That is a brilliant way to look at it.
Right. Like the marshmallow is the reproduction. It gets done. You get a toasted marshmallow. But the vast majority of the engineering was clearly focused on the sheer thrill of the ride.
Yes. The text is essentially arguing that the baby is the marshmallow. The biological continuation of the species is almost incidental to the primary design feature, which is the experience itself.
But wait, if the intense pleasure isn't strictly for survival, what does the author claim its actual purpose is?
Well, to answer that, the text drops the dry biological data and dives headfirst into the visceral, ethereal experience of orgasm itself. And let me tell you, they don't hold back.
No, they really don't. They pull from hitting sociological sources, too. The Casey reports, the Hattie report on sex, the Sex Codes China reports.
Right. They use all of these to capture the raw, phenomenological reality of a sexual climax.
They compile these intense, poetic, almost overwhelmingly vivid quotes from real people describing the experience.
Yeah, the language is wild. People describe the feeling as a space-exploring rocket shooting up explosively, or an indistinguishable internal explosion.
I think one person describes it as feeling completely immersed in a madly carefree sensation.
Yes. They say they feel as if they have literally left their flesh and spirit behind, caring for absolutely nothing else in the world in that split second.
It's described as raging flames, violent twitches, and an ecstasy that is almost unbearable to human power.
And the author leans into these extreme reality-bending descriptions very intentionally. They aren't just trying to be provocative here.
What's the goal then?
They are trying to establish that sexual climax is an ultimate beauty that completely conquers human will and thought.
Conquers human will. That's a strong phrase.
Think about it. In that moment, your ego basically dissolves. Your anxieties, your unpaid bills, your worldly concerns, they just vanish.
Yeah, it forces you completely out of your daily existence.
Right. And the text connects this to historical philosophy. They quote Ban Gu from the Han Dynasty, who called sexual intercourse the boundary of Tao, the ultimate expression of human emotion and nature.
Wow.
They even bring in Freud's conclusion that the underlying driving force of sex is the greatest force propelling all of social development.
Okay, I have to push back here for a second.
Sure. What do you think, Tim?
Because evolutionary biologists would argue that this pleasure is just a neurochemical bribe, right? It's just a massive dump of dopamine and oxytocin designed to trick our big, overthinking brains into doing the messy work of reproduction.
That is the standard scientific counterargument, yes.
So how does the author differentiate between a biological bribe to keep the species alive and a literal divine gift? Is the author arguing that the only reason we feel this mind-bending level of joy is simply because a creator wanted us to have fun?
Simply put, yes. It comes down to the sheer scale of the experience.
The scale.
Yeah, a biological bribe only needs to be good enough to get the job done. Think about eating. We enjoy eating because it keeps us alive.
Right.
But eating a sandwich doesn't typically cause an ego death where you feel your soul leaving your body.
Okay, fair point. I've had some good sandwiches, but not quite that good.
Exactly.
Right.
The author argues that the magnitude of sexual ecstasy far exceeds what is functionally required for a bribe. Therefore, the propagation of offspring is merely a byproduct.
So they explicitly state that this magnitude of pleasure is purely for the enjoyment of life.
Yes. It is the literal, tangible manifestation of the universal love of the greatest creator.
Wow. So the pleasure isn't a trick. The pleasure is the point.
The pleasure is the point. And because it's framed as a divine gift, the text argues that suppressing, inhibiting, or destroying your sex life is not a sign of piety.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they say it is actively going against human nature and the decree of the creator.
That is quite a statement.
They go so far as to say there is no such thing as debauchery in this specific context. If it is a gift of divine love, the more you experience it, the better.
They even reference a tragic figure from literature, right?
Yes. Lin Daiyu from the classic Chinese novel, A Dream of Red Mansion. She is this highly repressed, melancholic character who dies a miserable death.
And the author suggests her ending wouldn't have been so tragic if she had simply experienced the physiological release and joy of sexual pleasure.
Exactly.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Hmm.
Because claiming that uninhibited sexual pleasure is a divine gift puts this text on a massive head-on collision course with the ascetic teachings of almost every major world religion.
Oh, absolutely it does.
If we are supposed to be enjoying this divine gift, why do the heavy weights of religious history tell us to run away from it? And the text doesn't hide from this, right? It quotes them directly.
It does. The author brings the contradiction right into the light. It's a remarkably honest, rhetorical move.
Right. The author quotes Jesus from the Gospel of Matthew, the famous passage where Jesus warns that looking at a woman lustfully is already committing adultery in the heart.
And he says it's better to literally gouge out your own eye if it causes you to sin than for your whole body to be thrown into Gehenna.
Yeah. And then the author pivots and quotes Sakyamuni Buddha from the Shurangama Sutra, who warns that if you don't completely abstain from sexual misconduct, you will fall into the demonic path.
Regardless of how much wisdom or meditation you have achieved.
It's a really jarring juxtaposition. On one hand, the author is telling you that sexual ecstasy is the greatest, most palpable gift of the Creator.
And on the other hand, they are quoting the foundational figures of Christianity and Buddhism, saying that giving into lust will permanently destroy your soul.
It's as if the author is handing you a slice of the most decadent, beautifully crafted chocolate cake ever made, telling you the master chef specifically baked it just for your enjoyment.
Right.
But while you're eating it, they're reading aloud from a diet book written by the greatest health gurus in human history that says eating cake will absolutely destroy your body.
That is the perfect way to put it. And this raises an important question. If the author deeply respects Jesus and the Buddha, which they do.
Yeah, referring to Jesus as God and Sakyamuni as Buddha.
Exactly. So how do they justify actively defying their strictest, most foundational rules for spiritual purity? How does the text reconcile the cake and the diet book?
Right, because they don't seem to be rejecting the ascetic teachings at all.
Not at all. And this is the pivot. The text actually completely agrees with their ultimate endpoint.
Wait, they agree with it?
Yes. According to the author, the ultimate trajectory of human life is to transcend human nature entirely and become what they call angels, or supercelestial beings in Buddhas. These beings reside in the heaven world, or the Elysium world, and in those supreme, higher dimensional spaces, there is no marriage, there is no family attachment, and there is absolutely zero lust.
The text even quotes the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus says that when people rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven.
Right. The author argues that true Christians and true Buddhists are those who can completely cut off all worldly ties right now.
Family, property, fleshly desires, just like monks or nuns who dedicate their entire existence to spiritual cultivation.
But the author also recognizes a glaring, deeply practical problem with this.
Which is?
The ultimate goal is a heaven completely free of lust. But we are currently flesh and blood humans living in a biological reality where the Creator has purposefully gifted us this overwhelmingly powerful magical experience of sexual pleasure.
Right, so how does a normal, everyday person who isn't living in a monastery actually bridge that massive gap between human nature and angelic purity?
Exactly. If you just tell a normal person to stop desiring the greatest pleasure available to them, they're just going to feel guilty, and give up.
So, how do we bridge that gap? The author uses a central metaphor to solve this problem, right? The three-story building of human development.
Yes. In this model, the author maps out the spiritual journey. Christianity, with its goal of becoming an angel, is the top floor.
Okay.
Buddhism, guiding people to the Pure Land or Buddhahood, is the middle floor. And Lifechanyuan, which is the author's own philosophical framework, is the bottom floor.
So what does this all mean? Are we supposed to just ignore the top floors for now? How does Lifechanyuan actually function as a foundation rather than just a total rejection of those upper floors?
It functions as a necessary transitional phase. The author points out that jumping straight from our current, highly biological state to the ultimate endpoint of angelic purity is incredibly rare.
They use a great personal anecdote about their grandmother to illustrate this, don't they?
They do. She was born naturally repulsed by the smell of meat. She was a vegetarian her entire life, not because she was practicing strict discipline, but simply by birth.
Right, she was born with the wisdom of an angel, as the text puts it. She didn't have to fight the desire was just never there.
Exactly. But for the rest of us, trying to immediately surmount the huge mountain of sexual pleasure is like trying to go straight from primary school to a PhD program.
It's just not going to happen.
Right. It requires a thorough, fundamental remolding of oneself that is just too difficult for ordinary mortals. We are simply not equipped to make that jump in one step.
If you force it, you just end up with repression and hypocrisy.
Precisely.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of this philosophy. Because surmounting that huge mountain is too hard right now, Lifechanyuan offers a stepping stone, a middle ground. The author calls this first destination the 1,000-year world.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the 1,000-year world is described as a space of sublimated human nature.
Sublimated human nature.
Right. It's not the ultimate Elysium world of angels and Buddhas. It's still hundreds of thousands of miles away from that ultimate transcendence. But it is a step up. It's the middle school to our primary school.
But how does a highly physical act like sex fit into a sublimated spiritual world? Like, what are the mechanics of enjoying a physical desire without it anchoring you to the physical world and ruining your spiritual progress?
And that is where the author introduces a crucial theological loophole, the mechanism of gratitude.
Or gratitude.
Yes. The author explicitly states that the pleasure of sex is an arrangement of the greatest creator, a favor granted to us. You can enjoy the pleasure of sex right now, in this life, without derailing your spiritual journey, provided you change your internal orientation toward the act.
So it's not just mindless hedonism.
No, it's highly intentional. The argument is that if you engage in this intense pleasure selfishly, purely for ego gratification, it binds you to the earth.
Okay, that makes sense.
But if you enjoy it with profound gratitude and consciously remember the Creator's grace while experiencing that loss of ego, the act becomes a spiritual vehicle.
Wow.
The gratitude prevents the spiritual decay. It changes the act from a tether into a sail.
It completely reframes the narrative of guilt that so heavily dominates traditional religious views on sexuality.
It really does.
The text basically argues that you don't have to force an asceticism you weren't ready for. You can indulge in this gift, use the gratitude to reach the 1,000-year world first, and then eventually, over long stretches of time, progress to the 10,000-year world.
Right.
And finally, when you are truly ready, you make it to the ultimate Elysium world where those physical desires just naturally fall away like a child outgrowing a toy.
It's an incredibly unique synthesis. I mean, we've covered a massive amount of ground today, pulling from a text that really challenges conventional boundaries.
We really have. We started with the cold, hard biological reality that sexual reproduction is actually an inefficient, costly way to pass on genes compared to asexual cloning.
And we saw how the author brilliantly uses that biological inefficiency to argue that the intense, madly carefree pleasure of human intimacy isn't a trick of evolution.
Right, but a deliberate divine design, a gift engineered purely for the enjoyment of life.
From there, the text wove that physical reality together with complex theology. It didn't dismiss the strict ascetic teachings of Jesus or the Buddha. It elevated them.
It kept them as the ultimate goals on the top floors of spiritual development.
Exactly. But it offered a pragmatic, compassionate bottom floor for the rest of us living in the reality of human biology.
A stepping stone. framing the physical joy of sex not as a sin to be immediately conquered through guilt, but as a foundational experience.
Something to be enjoyed with profound gratitude on the long, multi-stage road to eventually becoming a celestial being.
And that is why this perspective is so deeply relevant to you as a listener, whether your background is in theology, biology, or philosophy. This text challenges you to stop compartmentalizing your life. It asks you to look at everyday, deeply physical, visceral human experiences, the very things we so often take for granted or wrap in centuries of religious guilt, and see them as tangible, undeniable evidence of a grander, supernatural design.
It asks you to rethink what evidence of the divine actually looks and feels like. It brings the cosmos down into your own biology.
And the author leaves us with one final, profoundly bold, and deeply personal claim that summarizes this entire philosophy.
Yeah, at the very climax of the text, synthesizing their own spiritual journey through the lens of physical intimacy, the author issues this direct challenge for you to mull over. They write, "I have seen the greatest creator through the pleasure of sex. Have you?"
So the next time you find yourself wondering about the architecture of the universe or looking for proof of a grand design, maybe you don't need to look through a telescope at the distant stars after all.
Maybe not.
Maybe, just maybe, the evidence is a whole lot closer to home. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.